the most photographed woman on the planet, a Hollywood goddess who has captivated billions with her piercing eyes and mysterious smile, sits down after decades of silence and finally opens up about the one person who truly held her heart. For years, we've watched Angelina Jolie transform from a rebellious wild child into one of the most respected humanitarians and actresses of our generation. We've seen her marriages, her divorces, her adoptions, and her evolution. But through all the headlines, the paparazzi photos, and the magazine covers, there was always one question that remained unanswered. Who was the real love of her life? Was it the tattooed bad boy who wore her blood in a vial around his neck? Was it the golden boy of Hollywood who gave her 6 children and a fairy tale that the world couldn't stop watching? Or was it someone completely unexpected? Someone from her past that we've all forgotten about? Today, we're diving deep into a confession that has rocked Hollywood to its core, a revelation that changes everything we thought we knew about one of the most fascinating women alive. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will completely change how you see Angelina Jolie's entire life story. Let's rewind the clock to the beginning. Because to understand the magnitude of this confession, we need to understand the journey that brought us here. Angelina Jolie burst onto the Hollywood scene not as the polished, sophisticated woman we know today, but as a wild, unpredictable force of nature who seemed determined to break every rule in the book. Born into Hollywood royalty as the daughter of Academy Award-winning actor Jon Voight and actress Mark-Helen Bertrand, Angelina had art and drama coursing through her veins from day one. But her childhood was far from the glamorous life you might imagine. When her parents separated when she was just a baby, something inside young Angelina broke. She's spoken candidly over the years about feeling abandoned by her father, about struggling with depression and self-harm as a teenager, about feeling so lost and alone that she didn't know if she wanted to continue living. These weren't just typical teenage angst issues. This was a young woman genuinely struggling to find her place in a world that felt too big, too painful, and too overwhelming. Her early relationships reflected this inner turmoil. At just 14 years old, Angelina had her first serious boyfriend, whose name she's never publicly revealed, but who left an indelible mark on her understanding of love and intimacy. She's described this relationship as intense and all-consuming, the kind of first love that makes you feel like you discovered fire for the first time. But like most teenage romances, it burned bright and fast before flickering out. What's fascinating about Angelina's approach to love, even from this young age, was her fearless intensity. She didn't do anything halfway. When she loved with every fiber of her being, throwing herself completely into the experience without holding anything back. This pattern would define her romantic relationships for decades to come, creating some of the most talked about love stories in Hollywood history, while also setting her up for some of the most painful heartbreaks. Then came Jonny Lee Miller, a British actor she met on the set of the cyberpunk film Hackers in 1995. Now, if you want to talk about unconventional romance, this was it. Angelina was just 20 years old, and Jonny Lee Miller represented something different from anyone she'd known before. He was edgy but intellectual, rebellious but grounded, and most importantly, he seemed to understand the wild, untamed parts of Angelina that others found intimidating or confusing. Their relationship moved at lightning speed, the way young love often does when it feels like you found your soulmate. They got married in 1996 in a ceremony that was pure Angelina. She wore black rubber pants and a white t-shirt with Johnny's name written on it in her own blood. Yes, you heard that right. Blood. This wasn't some publicity stunt or attention-seeking behavior. This was Angelina's genuine expression of the depth of her commitment. In her mind, she was binding herself to this man in the most literal, visceral way possible. But here's what most people don't understand about that first marriage. It was a failure, despite ending in divorce just 3 years later. Angelina has spoken warmly about Jonny Lee Miller over the years, describing him as a wonderful person and their relationship as genuine and loving. So why did it end? The simple answer is that they were both young, both ambitious. Both try to build careers in an industry that demands everything from you. The more complex answer is that Angelina was still trying to figure out who she was, still wrestling with inner demons that she didn't fully understand yet. She's admitted that during this period of her life, she was struggling with self-destructive tendencies. experimenting with things that could have seriously damaged her health and well-being, and generally living on the edge in ways that made a stable marriage nearly impossible. Jonny Lee Miller wasn't the problem. Angelina's relationship with herself was the problem. And until she could fix that, no relationship was going to work, no matter how much love was present. After the divorce, Angelina entered what can only be described as her wilderness years. She threw herself into increasingly daring and provocative film roles, building a reputation as one of Hollywood's most fearless actresses. She won her Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for a Girl, Interrupted in 2000, delivering a searing performance as Lisa Rowe, a charismatic sociopath in a mental institution. The role felt almost uncomfortably close to Angelina's real-life struggles with mental health, and she brought a raw authenticity to the character that left audiences and critics stunned. In her acceptance speech that night, she famously declared her love for her brother James Haven in terms that raised eyebrows and sparked tabloid speculation for years. The infamous kiss she shared with her brother that night became one of the most talked-about moments in Oscar history, though both have always maintained that their relationship was simply that of extremely close siblings who supported each other through their difficult childhood. But the real headline from that period wasn't her brother. It was Billy Bob Thornton. If her marriage to Jonny Lee Miller had been unconventional, her relationship with Billy Bob was absolutely off the charts. They met on the set of Pushing 10 in 1999, and the attraction was instant and overwhelming. There was just one problem. Billy Bob was engaged to actress Laura Dern at the time. The way their relationship began would haunt Angelina for years, with critics accusing her of being a homewrecker and Laura Dern famously stating that she went away for a few months to film a movie and came home to find her boyfriend had married someone else. It was messy, it was painful, and it was exactly the kind of intense, tornado-like love affair that Angelina seemed drawn to like a moth to a flame. Angelina and Billy Bob got married in May 2000 in a spontaneous ceremony in Las Vegas, and what followed was one of the most bizarre and fascinating celebrity relationships of the early 2000s. They wore vials of each other's blood around their necks. They talked openly about their intense physical relationship in graphic terms that made interviewers visibly uncomfortable. They adopted a son together from Cambodia, Maddox, who would change Angelina's life in ways she couldn't have imagined at the time. From the outside, they appear to be utterly obsessed with each other, unable to be apart for even a few hours without experiencing withdrawal-like symptoms. Billy Bob later admitted that he simply couldn't keep up with Angelina's energy and her growing involvement in humanitarian work. He was a homebody who liked his routine. She was becoming a globe-trotting activist who was discovering a sense of purpose that went beyond movie sets and red carpets. The adoption of Maddox in 2002 marked a turning point in Angelina's life that cannot be overstated. Suddenly, she had something that mattered more than her career, more than her relationships, more than her own troubled psyche. She had a child who depended on her, who needed her to be stable and present and healthy. Friends and family members have described this as the moment when Angelina finally started growing up, when a wild child began transforming into the woman who would eventually become a UN Goodwill Ambassador and one of the world's most respected humanitarian advocates. But this growth came at a cost to her marriage. By 2003, she and Billy Bob had separated, and she filed for divorce shortly thereafter. Years later, she would describe the relationship as passionate but ultimately unsustainable, a love that burned so hot it consumed itself. For a couple of years after Billy Bob, Angelina appeared to be focusing on herself and her growing family. She adopted her daughter Zahara from Ethiopia in 2005, and she threw herself into her humanitarian work with renewed intensity. She seemed, for the first time in her adult life, to be genuinely content being single, not searching for a man to complete her or validate her existence. She was building a life that had meaning and purpose, a life that extended far beyond the superficial world of Hollywood glamour. She was traveling to refugee camps, speaking out about international crises, using her celebrity platform to draw attention to issues that most Americans never thought about. She was in many ways becoming the person she had always been meant to be. And then came Brad Pitt. Oh, Brad Pitt. Where do we even begin with this chapter of the story? Their meeting on the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith in 2004 would spark one of the most controversial, most photographed, and most analyzed relationships in modern celebrity history. Brad was married to America's sweetheart, Jennifer Aniston, at the time, and the world was obsessed with their seemingly perfect marriage. Jennifer was a girl next door from Friends, relatable and warm, beloved by millions. Brad was the golden boy, the most handsome man in Hollywood, the guy who seemed to have it all. Their marriage was supposed to be the fairy tale that proved true love existed, even in the shark-infested waters of Hollywood. But then came the photos from the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, images of Brad and Angelina that crackled with undeniable chemistry. The way they looked at each other, the body language, the smiles. Even through still photographs, you could feel the electricity between them. Brad and Jennifer announced their separation in January 2005, and within months, paparazzi photos surfaced of Brad on a beach with Angelina and Maddox, looking for all the world like a family. The public reaction was swift and brutal. Team Aniston shirts appeared everywhere. Angelina was vilified as a homewrecker, a femme fatale who had stolen America's favorite husband. Death threats poured in. Tabloids ran vicious stories painting her as a calculating seductress who had destroyed a perfect marriage. But here's what's interesting about that narrative. Both Brad and Angelina have always maintained that they didn't have a physical relationship while he was still married to Jennifer. They've said repeatedly that they fell in love while working together, that their emotional connection was undeniable, but that they didn't act on it until after his marriage was over. Whether you believe that or not, the fact remains that what happened next would dominate entertainment headlines for over a decade. Brangelina was born, and the world couldn't look away. Their relationship in those early years seemed like something out of a movie. Brad essentially stepped into a ready-made family, embracing Maddox and Zahara as his own children. He and Angelina adopted Pax from Vietnam in 2007. She gave birth to their biological daughter Shiloh in 2006 in Namibia, with the first photos of the baby selling for over $4 million to People magazine. In 2008, she gave birth to twins Knox and Vivian in France. They bought a chateau in the south of France, Chateau Miraval, which would later become the center of one of their most bitter legal battles. They traveled the world together, with their growing brood of children in tow, appearing to live a life that was both impossibly glamorous and genuinely dedicated to making the world a better place. Brad seemed to change under Angelina's influence. He became more politically engaged, more interested in architecture and humanitarian causes, more thoughtful about how he used his platform. He adopted a more intellectual public persona, growing a beard, wearing glasses, carrying himself like a man of substance rather than just a pretty face. Critics who had always dismissed him as just another handsome actor started taking him seriously as a producer and activist. In many ways, he was becoming a male version of Angelina, and the transformation was remarkable to watch. They seemed to bring out the best in each other, to elevate each other to heights neither could have reached alone. For years, they famously refused to get married, stating that they didn't believe in the institution of marriage until everyone had the right to marry the person they loved, a reference to same-sex marriage bans that existed in most states at the time. But in 2014, they finally tied the knot in a small, private ceremony at Chateau Miraval, with their children playing a central role in the festivities. Angelina wore a white dress and veil covered in drawings by their kids. The wedding photos, which they sold to People and Hello, magazines with proceeds going to charity, showed a couple that appeared genuinely happy and in love. The world exhaled collectively. Brangelina had finally made it official. The fairy tale was complete, except it wasn't. Just 2 years later, in September 2016, Angelina filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and asking for sole physical custody of their 6 children. The announcement shocked the world. What had happened? The couple who had seemed so solid, so committed to their family and their shared values, was splitting up. Initial reports were vague, mentioning differences in parenting styles and approaches to life. But then details began to emerge about an incident on a private plane that would change the entire narrative. According to legal documents and reports that surfaced over the following months and years, there had been an altercation on a private plane flying from France to California. The exact details have been disputed, with different versions of events coming from different sources. But the general outline involves an argument between Brad and Angelina that escalated in front of their children, with allegations that Brad was physically aggressive toward one of the children and verbally abusive toward Angelina. The FBI investigated the incident but declined to press charges. Nevertheless, the damage was done. Angelina's primary concern, she stated repeatedly, was the safety and well-being of her children. What followed was one of the longest, most contentious, and most expensive divorces in Hollywood history. 8 years of legal battles over custody, child support, and the division of assets. 8 years of leaked court documents, explosive allegations, and a media-feeding frenzy that picked apart every aspect of their relationship and its dissolution. Brad maintained that he had made mistakes but painted himself as a father desperate to have a relationship with his children. Angelina positioned herself as a mother protecting her children from an unstable situation. The truth, as is usually the case in these situations, likely lies somewhere in the messy middle. The custody battle was particularly brutal. Brad fought for 50-50 custody, arguing that he had been an involved, loving father and deserved equal time with his children. Angelina argued that the children needed stability and that she should have sole physical custody, with Brad getting visitation rights. In 2021, they reached a private judge's decision that awarded them joint custody, which many saw as a victory for Brad. But Angelina's legal team immediately appealed, arguing that the judge had made errors and hadn't adequately considered testimony from the children about their preferences and experiences. That custody decision was eventually thrown out, and the battle continued. Meanwhile, there was a fight over Chateau Miraval, their French winery and estate. Brad sued Angelina in 2022, accusing her of improperly selling her shared property to a Russian oligarch's business partner without his approval, claiming they had an agreement that neither would sell without the other's consent. Angelina's team fired back with explosive allegations, claiming that Brad had tried to force her to sign a non-disclosure agreement that would have prevented her from speaking publicly about his alleged abuse as a condition of the sale, and that she refused to be silenced. The battle over this property had become symbolic of their entire relationship's dissolution, something beautiful they built together now being torn apart in the ugliest possible way, with both sides slinging accusations and neither willing to back down. Through all this chaos, all this pain and public spectacle, Angelina has largely maintained her dignity and her silence. She hasn't given tell-all interviews or written books about her side of the story. She hasn't gone on talk shows to cry and defend herself, though the temptation must have been overwhelming at times. She's focused, she said repeatedly, on her children and on healing as a family. She's continued her humanitarian work, continued acting in carefully selected projects, continued showing up to events with her head held high even as tabloids speculated endlessly about her mental state, her health, and her romantic prospects. But recently, something has shifted. After years of carefully guarded silence, after a lifetime of romantic relationships that captivated the world, Angelina Jolie has begun opening up in ways she never has before. In interviews promoting her latest film projects, she's been more candid, more vulnerable, more willing to discuss the painful events of her past. And in one particular conversation, she made a confession that has sent shockwaves through Hollywood and beyond, a revelation that changes the entire narrative of her romantic history. When asked about love, about who had truly captured her heart in all her years of high-profile relationships, Angelina paused. The journalist who was interviewing her noted that the pause lasted for what felt like an eternity, that you could see Angelina's mind working, debating whether to finally tell the truth or to give another carefully crafted, diplomatically vague answer. And then, finally she spoke. She said that she had never truly been deeply in love the way people imagine love should be. She said that in all her marriages, in all her relationships, there had been genuine affection, real care, and moments of deep connection, but that the kind of all-consuming, so deep love that people write songs about and make movies about it always eluded her. But then she went further. She admitted that if she had to identify one person who came closest to capturing her heart completely, it wasn't who anyone expected. It wasn't Brad, despite their 12 years together and 6 children. It wasn't Billy Bob, despite their intense passion and public obsession with each other. It wasn't even Jonny Lee Miller, her first husband who she's maintained a friendship with over the years. No, the person Angelina identified as the closest she's come to experiencing true, deep, transformative love was someone most people have forgotten about entirely. Jenny Shimizu. Jenny Shimizu was a model and actress who worked with Angelina on the 1996 film Foxfire, and they had a relationship during and after filming. Angelina has acknowledged this relationship in passing over the years, even admitting in a 1997 interview with a magazine that she would have married Jenny if she hadn't married Jonny Lee Miller. But it was always mentioned casually, almost as an aside, as if it were just an experimental phase or a footnote in her romantic history. What Angelina is now revealing is that this relationship was far more significant than anyone realized. Jenny, she says, understood her in ways that no one else ever has. Jenny didn't try to tame her or change her or make her fit into some conventional box. Jenny embraced all of Angelina's complexity, her darkness and her light, her wild impulses and her tender vulnerabilities. In recent conversations, Angelina has been reflecting on why her marriages and high-profile relationships didn't ultimately work. She's talked about how, with men, there was always an element of performance, of trying to be what they needed or what the world expected her to be. With Brad, she was trying to be the perfect mother, the supportive partner, the humanitarian who could do it all. With Billy Bob, she was the bad girl, the wild woman, the one who would match his intensity. With Jonny, she was the young wife trying to figure out domestic life. But with Jenny, she says she could just be Angelina. No performance, no expectations, no pressure to be anything other than exactly who she was in that moment. This confession is revolutionary, not just for what it reveals about Angelina's inner life, but for what it represents in terms of Hollywood's evolving understanding of love and sexuality. For decades, Angelina has been open about her bisexuality. But in a culture that often treats bisexuality as either a phase or performance, her relationships with men have always been what defined her public romantic narrative. By now coming forward and saying that her most authentic experience of love was with a woman, she's challenging decades of assumptions and narratives. She's saying that the fairy tale the world wanted to believe in, Brangelina, the beautiful couple with their rainbow family, wasn't her truth. Her truth was messier, queerer, and more complicated than any tabloid headline could capture. What makes this confession even more poignant is the timing. Angelina is now in her late 40s. Her divorce from Brad finally finalized in December 2024 after 8 brutal years of legal warfare. She's at a point in her life where she's less concerned with what the world thinks of her and more interested in living authentically. She said in recent interviews that she's not looking for another relationship, that she's content being single and focused on her children as they grow into young adults. But by acknowledging Jenny as the great love of her life, she's also acknowledging something deeper, that she may have been searching in the wrong places all along. Think about what this means. Angelina Jolie, one of the world's most beautiful women, who could have had literally anyone she wanted, who was pursued by and pursued some of the most desirable men on the planet, is now saying that her most authentic experience of love was with someone who the world largely dismissed as a brief experimental fling. It's a rejection of everything our culture tells us about love and relationships. It's a rejection of the Hollywood fairy tale, of the idea that the right man will complete you and make everything make sense. It's a profoundly radical statement, even in 2025 when we like to think we become more accepting and open-minded. But here's the thing that makes this story even more complex. Jenny Shimizu has moved on with her life. She's been in a long-term relationship with another woman for years. She's built a life that doesn't include Angelina, except as a memory from decades ago. So this is a story about rekindled romance or second chances. This is a story about regret, about roads not taken, about the loves that get away because we're too young or too scared or too concerned with what other people think to hold on to them. It's a story about a woman looking back at her life and realizing that the moment when she felt most alive, most herself, most capable of true vulnerability and connection, was a moment she let slip away because she didn't understand its value at the time. Angelina has talked about how, when she was in her 20s and involved with Jenny, she didn't have the emotional maturity or self-awareness to fully commit to a relationship with a woman. The world was different then. Hollywood was less accepting. Her career was just taking off, and she was terrified of being typecast or marginalized. She was also still dealing with her own identity issues, her struggles with depression and self-harm, her complicated relationship with her body, and her sexuality. She wasn't ready to be in a healthy relationship with anyone, let alone to navigate the additional complexity of a same-sex relationship in the public eye. So she married Jonny Lee Miller instead, choosing what felt like the safer, more conventional path. And in many ways, that pattern repeated itself throughout her life. She chose relationships that made sense to the world, that fit the narrative people expected from her. Billy Bob was edgy and unconventional, but he was still safely within the bounds of what Hollywood understood. Brad was the ultimate prize, the relationship that elevated her from controversial actress to one half of the world's most powerful couple. These relationships brought her children, brought her professional opportunities, brought her a certain kind of validation and acceptance. But they also required her to suppress or hide parts of herself, to perform versions of Angelina Jolie rather than simply being herself. The confession about Jenny has sparked a broader conversation about authenticity and performance in celebrity culture. How much of what we see from celebrities is real, and how much is carefully constructed image management? How many people, famous or not, are living lives that look perfect on the outside but feel hollow on the inside because they're not being true to themselves? Angelina's admission that her most famous relationship was also her least authentic one is a mirror being held up to our culture's obsession with appearances and conventional success stories. It's worth noting that both Brad and Billy Bob have moved on with their lives as well. Brad has been in a relationship with Inesta Ramon for over 2 years, and sources close to him say he's happier and more at peace than he's been in years. He's reconciled with some of his children, though not all, and he's focused on his production company and his art collection and building a life that works for him. Billy Bob has been married to Connie England since 2014 and seems to have found a domestic stability that eluded him with Angelina. Jonny Lee Miller has also remarried and has children. These men have all moved forward, building new lives and new identities separate from their time with Angelina. But for Angelina, this process of moving forward has required something different. A reckoning with her past, an honest assessment of who she's been and who she wants to be going forward. And part of that reckoning has involved acknowledging that her public love story and her private truth were not the same thing. It's involved admitting that she made choices throughout her life based on fear, obligation, and external expectations rather than following her heart. It's involved recognizing that the love she spent decades searching for might have been right there in front of her in her 20s, but she was too lost and too scared to grab hold of it. This doesn't mean that her relationships with men weren't real or meaningful. She's been clear about that. She genuinely cared for all of her partners. She doesn't regret her children for even a second. They are, she says, the greatest joy and achievement of her life. She learned important things about herself in each relationship, grew in ways she needed to grow, became the person she is today through all of these experiences. But caring for someone and building a life with them is not the same as being truly, deeply in love. And what she's acknowledging now is that she settled for caring and compatibility and shared values when what she really wanted, what she really needed, was that electric, undeniable connection that makes you feel like you finally come home to yourself. The public reaction to this confession has been mixed, predictably. Some people have praised Angelina for her honesty and vulnerability, for being willing to challenge conventional narratives and speak her truth even when it's uncomfortable. LGBTQ+ advocates have celebrated her acknowledgement of a same-sex relationship as the most significant love of her life, seeing it as validation and representation at the highest levels of Hollywood. Younger fans, particularly Gen Z who have a more fluid understanding of sexuality and relationships, have embraced the story as a modern tale of self-discovery and authenticity. But there has also been backlash. Brad Pitt's fans have accused Angelina of rewriting history and minimizing their relationship to hurt him further. Some critics have suggested this is all just publicity for her upcoming projects, a calculated move to generate buzz and remind people that she's still relevant and controversial. Conservative commentators have used the confession as ammunition in culture war battles, either attacking Angelina for promoting alternative lifestyles or attacking Hollywood for its moral decay. And some people simply don't believe her, thinking this is another example of a celebrity creating a narrative for attention. What's fascinating about all of these reactions is that they say more about us, the audience, than they do about Angelina herself. We want celebrities' lives to fit into neat boxes, to tell coherent stories with clear beginnings, middles, and ends. We want the fairy tale or the cautionary tale, the hero or the villain. What we don't want is messy, complicated reality where people make mistakes, change their minds, don't always understand what they want, and spend decades figuring out truths about themselves that seem obvious in hindsight. We don't want to consider that maybe Brad and Angelina were both good people who loved each other in their way, but were ultimately incompatible. We don't want to think about how many people are living lives that look successful on the outside while feeling empty on the inside. Angelina's story is forcing us to confront these uncomfortable realities. It's asking us to question our assumptions about love, about sexuality, about what it means to live an authentic life. It's suggesting that maybe the conventional path, marriage, children, white picket fence, isn't the only path to happiness, and might not even be the right path for many people who follow it, because it's what's expected rather than what they genuinely want. It's proposing that maybe we should listen to our hearts and our bodies and our souls rather than to the voices of society, family, and culture telling us who we should be and what we should want. For Angelina personally, this confession seems to be part of a larger process of liberation. In recent years, since her divorce from Brad, she's been shedding layers of persona she built over decades in the spotlight. She's been taking acting roles that challenge her, like playing opera singer Maria Callas in Maria, exploring complex, flawed women rather than action heroes and ingenues. She's been writing and directing films that tell difficult stories about war, trauma, and survival. She's been speaking out more forcefully about issues she cares about, less concerned with being diplomatic and more willing to be controversial. And now, she's being honest about her romantic history in ways she never has been before. This evolution is particularly striking when you consider where she started. The wild child of the late 90s, making out with her brother at the Oscars, wearing vials of blood, collecting knives, talking openly about her fascination with death and pain. That Angelina was performing a version of edginess and rebellion that was as much a costume as any red carpet gown. She was acting out, trying to shock the world because she didn't know how else to process the pain and confusion she felt inside. The Angelina who became Brangelina was performing a different role: the perfect mother, the devoted wife, the serious artist and humanitarian. That version was more admirable, more worthy of respect, but it was still a performance, still a version of herself constructed for public consumption. What we're seeing now might be the first time Angelina Jolie is simply being herself, without apology or performance or concern for how it will be received. She's a middle-aged woman who has lived an extraordinary life, made spectacular mistakes, achieved remarkable things, hurt people and been hurt, and is now trying to make sense of it all and live whatever time she has left in a way that feels true. That includes acknowledging that the love story the world wanted her to have was not the love story she actually lived, and that the person who saw her most clearly was someone most people have forgotten about. Where does this leave us? Where does it leave Angelina? The confession about Jenny doesn't change the fact of her life. She still has 6 children who are a priority. She still has a career that continues to evolve. She still has humanitarian work that gives her life meaning. She's not going to suddenly leave everything behind to try to rekindle a romance with a woman she dated in the 90s. That's not what this is about. This is about truth-telling, about finally being honest about her inner life, about refusing to let the world perception of her relationships define how she understands her own history. It's also, perhaps, about closure. By acknowledging Jenny as the great love of her life, Angelina is closing the door on a chapter that has defined her public image for decades. The search for the perfect partner, the next great romance, the man who will finally make her whole. She's saying she's done with that search, done with that narrative, done with trying to find completion in another person. She's saying she's enough on her own, that her children are enough, that her work is enough. And if she never experiences that kind of deep romantic love again, she's made peace with that, because at least she experienced it once, even if she was too young and too lost to hold on to it. There's something profoundly moving about a woman who has been desired by millions, who could have had any partner she wanted, coming to the conclusion that the most important relationship in her life is the one with herself. After decades of tumultuous romances, of trying to be what other people needed, of sublimating her own desires and identity for the sake of relationships and family, Angelina is finally putting herself first, not in a selfish way, but in the way that anyone who has survived trauma and heartbreak eventually must, by recognizing that you cannot pour from an empty cup, that you cannot be a good mother or friend or artist or humanitarian if you're not first honest with yourself about who you are and what you need. The confession about Jenny is not just about one relationship from decades ago. It's about a lifetime of choices, of roads taken and not taken, of the many versions of ourselves we inhabit over the course of a life. It's about regret and acceptance, about honoring the past without being imprisoned by it. It's about recognizing that love comes in many forms, that the love she has for her children is real and profound even if romantic love has been elusive, that the love she has for her work and her humanitarian causes matters. That self-love is not just a trendy phrase, but an essential foundation for a meaningful life. As we watch Angelina move into this next phase of her life, there's a sense that she's finally become the person she was always meant to be. Not the rebellious wild child, not the devoted wife and mother, not the Hollywood icon or the humanitarian saint, but something more complex and more real, a human being who has lived deeply and suffered greatly and loved imperfectly and is still here, still trying, still evolving. The confession about Jenny is not the end of her story. It's the beginning of a new chapter, one where she writes her own narrative rather than letting the world write it for her. And maybe that's the real lesson in all of this. Maybe the point is not who was the love of Angelina Jolie's life, but rather that she finally has the courage and the self-awareness to tell her own truth, regardless of how it might be received. In a world that constantly demands that women, especially famous women, perform certain roles and maintain certain images, there is something revolutionary about simply saying, "This is who I am, this is what I've experienced, and I'm not going to pretend anymore." The masks are off. The performance is over. This is just Angelina in all her complicated, contradictory, magnificent reality. So what happens now? Where does this revelation leave Angelina Jolie and her legacy? In the immediate term, it has certainly reignited public interest in her life and work. Old interviews with Jenny Shimizu are being dug up and reanalyzed. Clips from Foxfire are going viral on social media. Think pieces about bisexuality and authenticity in Hollywood are proliferating. Angelina's upcoming film projects are getting renewed attention. In the court of public opinion, the narrative about her is shifting, becoming more nuanced and sympathetic. People are reconsidering their judgments about her divorce from Brad, wondering if there were depths to that situation that no one understood. People are looking back at her entire romantic history through a new lens, seeing patterns they missed before. But beyond the immediate media circus, this confession represents something bigger. It represents a cultural moment where a major Hollywood star can acknowledge a same-sex relationship as the most significant love of her life without it ending her career or her relevance. It represents progress, however imperfect, in how we as a society understand sexuality, identity, and love. And it represents the power of truth-telling, of being willing to be vulnerable and honest even when it's risky and uncomfortable. Angelina Jolie has been many things over her decades in the public eye, but what she's becoming now, an older, wiser woman who has learned to value authenticity over approval, might be her most important role yet. For her children, this confession adds another layer to the complex legacy they will inherit from their famous mother. They have watched her navigate one of the most contentious divorces in Hollywood history. They have dealt with the judgment and scrutiny that comes from having two of the world's most famous people as parents. They have had their childhoods dissected in tabloids and their every move analyzed. And now they're learning that their mother's truth is more complicated than anyone knew, that her happiest memories of love come from a time before any of them existed, with a person most of them have probably never met. How they process this information, how it shapes their understanding of their mother and of love in general, remains to be seen. But Angelina has always maintained that her honesty with her children about her struggles, her mistakes, and her truth is one of the most important gifts she can give them. As for Jenny Shimizu, she has responded to questions about Angelina's confession with grace and discretion. She's acknowledged that they had a significant relationship and that she has fond memories of their time together. But she's also made clear that she has moved on with her life and is happy in her current relationship. She's not looking to capitalize on renewed interest in their past romance, not seeking attention or trying to insert herself back into Angelina's story. Her dignity in this moment is a reminder that not everyone in Hollywood is driven by fame and attention, that some people value privacy and peace more than relevance. The truth is that we may never know all the details of what really happened between Angelina and Jenny, or why Angelina considers it the great love of her life, or what exactly it was about that connection that has haunted her for decades. And maybe we don't need to know. Maybe the specifics matter less than what the confession represents. A woman brave enough to tell her truth, even when that truth complicates the narrative we've all accepted about her life. Maybe what matters is that, after decades of performance and pretense, Angelina Jolie has finally allowed herself to be seen as she really is. And so we come to the end of this journey through one of the most fascinating revelations in recent Hollywood history. After decades of silence, of carefully managed public appearances and diplomatic non-answers, Angelina Jolie has finally confessed that the love of her life was not who we expected. It wasn't the golden boy who gave her a fairy tale family. It wasn't the bad boy who wore her blood around his neck. It was a woman most people have forgotten, a relationship most people dismissed, a love she let slip away because she was too young and too scared to hold on to it. This confession changes nothing and everything. It doesn't change the facts of her life, but it changes how we understand those facts. It doesn't change her past, but might change her future, freeing her to live more authentically going forward. What will you take away from this story? Maybe it's a reminder to listen to your heart, rather than the voices telling you who you should be. Maybe it's an understanding that love comes in many forms, and that the most profound connections sometimes happen when and where we least expect them. Maybe it's simply a fascination with one of the most captivating women in modern history, finally revealing a secret she's kept for decades. Whatever your takeaway, one thing is certain. Angelina Jolie's story is far from over, and this latest chapter is perhaps the most honest, most vulnerable, and most human one she's ever shared with us. The masks are off, the truth is out, and after decades of being whatever the world needed her to be, Angelina Jolie is finally just being herself.